did you two meet each
in
other?
an ice cream parlor in the Bronx.
Where I should not have been because I was a chunky little thing. But I went in there because I followed my girlfriend. She
We had
a
an
nice
we had an ice cream parlor, like to have a beer garden around now, and it was in our neighborhood in the Bronx, and then we used to hang around there and eat a pretzel and share a malted, we'd share 10 cents each and a more,
2 cents
each
plain.
a penny for a pretzel or
And we
something.
came from different backgrounds,
Oh,
His parents were American,
Oh,
and my parents, my mother couldn't read or write.
where were your parents from?
Russia. My father was very proud of Russia, but he wouldn't be so proud today. But it was different.
We had, in our marriage, it was a completely different culture shock. It was a culture shock. My parents were born in New York City. The name Sedran was famous. My uncle is in the Hall of Fame. He's a basketball player, Hall of Fame.
Oh, wow.
You know how I knew I was hooked? Back to what you were saying? I'm sitting in this ice cream parlor with my friend. We hung around and we shared a malted. You'd get 2 glasses and it was 10 cents a nickel.
Not with
apiece.
me.
And a pretzel. No, my buddy Lee Tannen, he was,
How old were you?
well, I must have been 14 or so. I was still in high school. I was a senior in high school, 15. And,
He's
oh,
older.
what am I
He's the
talking about? I
older
was
guy.
older than that, sure. I went to war a year later. I was about 18 years
Probably
old,
about
17.
17.
She walks in with a friend who I knew well, and that's how we met, Now we dated, and now I go off, a
Goes
year
off
later, I
to
go off
war.
to war, and I'm getting letters from her all the time. And all of a sudden, I get a letter telling me that she had visited my mother and had dinner with my mother, and they are very nice and all that. And I said, oh, even as young as I was, I'm in trouble, Before I went overseas, I was stationed, my 22nd birthday was in DeRidder, Louisiana. My 23rd was in the middle of Italy. And my 24th was on the island of Corsica. Anyway,
And we did go to Israel.
I come home, we're going to go overseas. So I was in the Air Force, so you'll know. And we're going to go overseas, and we go from Louisiana, we come to New York, and we bunked up in there, and I said, well, I'm going home. And they said, well, the officers in charge, the landlubbers that were in charge of this cabinet. I said, well, we'll give you New York guys a chance to go home for, to visit your family. There's a couple of you guys here. Meanwhile, the next day, I find out they went to a Broadway show. And, well, that's all you had to tell 21-year-old Stan Sedran, We cut a hole in the fence and we went home. And I went home to the Bronx. I got on a train and went home, and I cut all the signatures off my uniform. And so, and
I was at a party
and I called to get her, and she
Some guy
was at a
was-
party or something, and I
for a
called,
guy that was going away.
and my friends call up and say, hey, how do you get to your house? What happened? They heard about the hole in the fence, and several of them came through.
Oh.
And they were from not New York, and they came to my house in the Bronx. And my father was getting the booze out, and a couple of girls from upstairs, and I called her, and she was at a party or something, and she came up and met us. And then after we all was finished, we had to get back to where we were going.
They had to sneak
And so
back.
we got a taxi cab, and she got in the taxi cab. We weren't worried
Could you
about a woman
imagine
getting on
3
the
o'clock
subway
in
at
the
3 in the
morning
morning.
getting?
And thinking back recently, I've been starting to think about the war, and all of a sudden the
He
things
never
are coming in.
spoke about the war to me all the time that
I was
we were married.
mature enough
Until
that I
now.
still remember coming out of the service, and I sat with some of my friends, and we'd been through hell, believe me. And 3 years, and I said, they're not going to I still remember sitting around with the guys, and I was saying to a few of my friends, they're not going to know what we've been through. They just read it in the papers. I was mature enough that not to expect anything. They're just not going to understand. Those guys that came home for me, they didn't all make it. And I was just going through some notes of mine just for the hell of it. You weren't supposed to keep a diary, because if you ever got captured, Germans would know where you were going.
Right.
You didn't tell that to Sedran. I had a little loose leaf book, and I kept everything.
Was your family supportive of you guys moving here? Because that seems like it would be
My
No,
a...
I
mother
had no
never,
problem.
my mother never said one word. Well, when I was coming here, I became pregnant the second
We had
week.
nothing else to do,
I had
huh?
Someone said, don't they have anything else to do here? I said, well, I
9
don't
months
know.
after she came, we had a
But-
baby.
My mother didn't say one word. I also did not tell her that I was pregnant because I didn't want her to grieve. But she never said anything when we moved. And my father said, you're going there to South Carolina, you're gonna get the Ku Klux Klan. That's what he said. The Ku Klux Klan is gonna get you. I says, Pa, my name is not Goldstein anymore. My name is Sedran.
So do you think that having a name like Sedran
Oh,
helps?
Goldstein, you're Jewish.
So
and
you could
it's
kind of
not-
Sedran,
like,
you could get, they didn't
Yeah.
know which
They didn't
way.
know
They
that it
didn't
was
know
cut
what
down
was-
from Sedransky when they came over. The first store was right in the middle of Main Street, across from, you know where the Hyatt is? Down from the Hyatt.
So that
Same
was-
address, 220 North Main Street.
okay.
And there was an S&S S&S cafeteria there. And I used to dress the window, and on Sunday, the people went to church, and they'd come by and they'd look in the window, and believe it or not, we made a couple of sales, and they made us promise not to tell people they were shopping on Sunday.
Oh.
And then we used to put it on layaway. We did a lot of layaway. Then we moved to the corner, 247 North Main.
Across the street.
Across the street, up on the, oh, was that before you were here? It was right up on the very corner where there's a little French, there's a
Yeah.
little sushi restaurant there.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
the
that was it.
landlord owned that whole property, all the buildings, and there were stores all along. When they, when the son inherited the building, and the father said, you can stay here for a lifetime, you know, the son inherits a building, and attorneys making millions. Suddenly, I see
sold it.
people looking at the building, they're buying, you know. And Hyatt had just come in, and I got to know them, and they came over. I think Max brought the guys over. And the guy said, why don't you come over here if you're having a problem? And next thing you know, I moved to the Hyatt
I
and
couldn't
changed my
believe the
business
rent that
completely.
they charged us
Stopped the
was
storage,
nothing.
which
I
was
mean,
big income.
It was very,
And
very
and,
fair.
had
you
to
didn't
let
have
the
the
girls
space?
go. No. And we were in the Hyatt for 20 years.
Then
I still remember when I decided to go in for myself, Max Heller and I had become friends. He said he was teaching me the European way of life, and I was teaching him the Bronx way. We got along great that way. And he, why don't you call it this? Why don't you call it the bowl? Why don't you call it? And I said, no, man, Max, I'm going to call it Sedran so it'll be recognized. That was one decision I made, which was good, because the name became recognizable. And as soon as they heard the name with all the advertising we were doing, you know, they related to it, and that was a good thing that I did, you know.
It was a good way to find out everybody's
And when I walk
business.
into a party, the men would immediately, you know, walk over to me, the women, stay away from my wife, stay away from my wife, you know. They weren't worried about biological stuff. They were worried about me talking to them about a fur, you know. My wife, who was a bookkeeper for a huge textile firm on Fifth Avenue, New York, well, when I opened a business for myself, I just one employee that I had, a main woman who was very, very nice. But May started to come in, my wife, and started to help me. And before, you know, it took a few years, she really took to it. She loves fashion, and she enjoyed doing, and I take it in New York when I went buying and everything, and she really was a tremendous help at that point, you know, and of course, we started when I would, you know, I tell the young people today, you don't get it when by talking about it. I would close the store at 5:30, and I would go in the back and I'd work all night. And we had one car, but we lived up on North Main, not 10 minutes away, and May would pick me up. The buses would stop running, and I'd call her at 10, 11 o'clock at night and say, I'm ready to go home. She'd just make sure the kids were comfortable, and she'd come down, pick me up, and we'd go back. We only had one car at the time. So we paid our dues, you know.
Yeah.
I picked up furs from every single house in every neighborhood around here. And
Those furs are heavy. How
Yeah,
did
we
you even?
we picked them up. That's what
Well,
I
I
started to
didn't
say that I.
take them all at one time. I called the lady and I said, I'm gonna be on your street, would you like me to pick up your thing? Oh, that would be wonderful. And
Excuse
I
me, but what happened is I have one of my employees to call a certain section.
Oh, I
Let's say
see.
they call Chanticleer, and said, Mrs. Sedran's gonna be in your area, would you want the bird? Well, what you would go out at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, we wouldn't see it till 5 o'clock because everybody had a rent for
And my
coffee.
trunk was full
Well,
of
that
furs.
must have become just as big a part of your business
Yeah,
as
a huge
sales
part
was
of
the
it.
storage
It was-
business,
Oh.
right? When you first got here and then when you opened your store, were there other Jewish store owners?
The old-time families were here, and they were all fairly successful business people, and no one approached us, but I mentioned that I shared the store with Sherby's, and Mr. Rothschild, who owned Sherby's, was a German refugee. He had escaped before Hitler came in, and very successful. He had a department store in Germany. He was the president of the temple, and he talked me into going to the temple. And nobody from the synagogue approached. There was they were not Orthodox. It was.
They had already changed from Orthodox to
Yeah, right.
conservative?
They were not that religious. I was brought up in a religious family, but I'm confirmed, bar mitzvah, no. But we joined, and then when my little girl was about 5 years old, and she was going to Sunday school, she came home with pictures of everything she's drawing. I said, well, what'd you learn? Well, no, about this picture. The next term she's coming back with the same pictures. And May and I said, wait a while. This is not a Jewish education, She's a good artist, that's fine. And so and then by that time we had become very friendly with Max Heller, Dan and Sue Shager were very, and Alex Davis and I became very friendly. These were principals in the synagogue, and I became very friendly with them, and they said, well, why don't you come over? And the next thing you knew, we did the right thing, in our opinion. We transferred and joined the synagogue, which would probably be in mid-1950s sometime.
So that was that around the time when they started talking about building a new
The
building?
two, yes, and the two, they were like enemies. The Reform and we weren't.
Why do you think that was?
We weren't. Yeah, they just didn't like each other, and they couldn't do anything together. And it was the next generation that finally melded together, where we had parties
They were
together.
a little on the snobby side.
Yeah.
And,
But-
and if you came the way we came, not with money and a big business, they wouldn't have anything to do with you.
Oh yes.
You know?
They said,
So-
well, you won't be here more than a year or
Yeah,
two.
you won't
you're
be
in the
here
store.
long. So they
and,
wouldn't include you in a lot of things.
Yeah, socially we were not
Two
invited.
little Jewish ladies came up to our place, we live in
Duplex.
a duplex, and they came to call on us. And she asked us about joining the synagogue. I said, nobody has ever come to us to join the synagogue. And they looked at each other, and they said, we have to do something about that. And that's when we turned around and we said, I think, I would like to go. When it's Yom Kippur or a holiday, I went to synagogue with my parents.
Sure. So they actually finally came to your
Finally
door.
came
and
Those
said,
two women
We-
said, we're gonna have to do something about that.
Yeah. So do you remember who they were?
I can't remember
I'm
their
sure
names
they passed away by
offhand.
now.
Can you talk a little bit about that, like what the old synagogue was like and
Well, that's where I joined. They were on Town Street, and it was just a
And
building.
it was little.
That's where I met Max, and I still remember him saying to me, you teach me about
You
American. That's where I first met Max Heller. Somehow we hit it off. We were very,
And they
very
used
good friends.
their accent was very funny from reading from the synagogue. The y'all.
Yeah, she used to make fun of them there, having a bar mitzvah, and they're
Yeah.
talking with a southern accent.
They'd say, we didn't know what they were saying. My
Yeah.
father said that when he came, he said, one word, I don't understand what they're saying.
I still have a
But
problem
in that little
occasionally.
synagogue, the fellow got up and he said, Baruch Tov.
Hebrew with a
Yeah, that's
southern
right.
accent.
And
Well-
they spoke funny, and it was a little place, and it just was little.
And
And
then
we
they
outgrew it.
technically,
There was no air conditioning either,
No.
was there? I heard it got
I
very
just went
hot
in my
there.
car.
you
but
went
had
in
air
and everybody was
conditioning.
crowded in. And luckily, we came towards the end of it, you know. And the reason, obviously, was that we just outgrew it when more
Yeah,
people
we
came
weren't
in.
there that
And we
long.
paid, I think it was like $15 or $20 a month or something was, you know, maybe
that's
25,
$20
depending
a
on your
month.
income, you know. And this is what our dues
the
were
dues.
at the time. But we were always fundraising and running these various things, and it takes a leader, which I don't find that we have now. I still remember standing outside in the street when we broke the ground, and they handed me a shovel. I said, I just joined. I said, shovel them dirt, you know. And look what happened. But the city was the same. You know, the city grew. A story I have to not forget to tell you about is when we built this section of the synagogue.
Yes, we want to hear about that.
And I was the building chairman at the time, and High Omen, I'm mentioning
Who's
two people
gone.
that have gone now, and Carl Proser, who was very, very religious and very, but a good worker here. And the three of us, I asked those two to help me. Now, how are we going to figure this out? We don't know what the configuration, all we knew we had the space. So we figured, well, if we put chairs, how are we going to assign seats to everybody? And really, three grown men were hysterical laughing, figuring out, well, if we have benches the way they're doing it now, how are we going to tell people where to sit because they're going to fight like heck, you know? Well, the Hellas and the Sedrans always sat in the back row over there in the Shakers. We know that, and
Sue and
Alex
Dan
Davis sat
Shaker.
there. But, you know, other people, and we started measuring. And we started, we're going to assign seats. I said,
Measured
this is
bodies.
not going to work. You tell a Jewish woman, you got to sit here. You know, I don't want to sit over there. And we started measuring seats, and I swear to you, we started measuring the back sides. No, she's so heavy, I'm not mentioning names now. You're giving her one seat? There's no way she can take up one seat. You got to give her enough room for two. And three grown men were laying on the floor here laughing our heads off, you know. And we finally gave it up
You
and
finally
go
decided-
sit where you want, you know. But we spent the better part of the night hysterical laughing. Three grown men, you know, we never got over it, you know. It was, so we did have some fun in those days.
You must have had a lot more space here than in the old synagogue, right?
Oh, yeah. We used to have a lot of parties here. And Sue Shager, to mention a deceased friend of ours, a real great, it always takes somebody. And she was an inspiration to the synagogue because she helped raise money and ran up fairs. We did things. We had parties here. We once did Laugh-In here and invited the entire city. And the reason we got it, Sue Shaker had May and I were over for dinner at her house, and when we stopped for coffee afterwards, she says, "You're not going," to me. And I said, "What are you talking about?" She says, "You're going in here." And I said, "What are you talking about?" She says, "Write a script for Laugh-In." She says, you do what, we'll have our coffee inside. And of course, I plagiarized everything that I could think of, and I wrote that and we did a whole show for the whole city, and we raised a lot of money. We
Nobody
had
knew
affairs.
who we were.
Oh, yeah, I
Because
was.
he was dressed as this dirty old man.
Oh,
You remember Laugh-In where the
recognize-
dirty
Sure.
old man was sitting on a couch? And
Yes,
Well, I'm
yes.
sitting with one of our senator, Bradley Morrow, our state senator, and I invited him and his wife as guests, and we're sitting at the table having dinner, and then I said, "You have to excuse me, I have to go back and help them get prepared." And now I change into all this stuff, and I heard him sitting in the front row saying, "Who is that guy?" He didn't recognize me. But we used to have, point being that we had a lot of fun, and we raised money. And it took a while where when we had a function, I could walk up to somebody like Harry Abrams, you know, to mention the name, a good temple man, and I'd say, "Hey, we're having an affair. Can we get it? I need a bottle of scotch. I didn't want to buy it, you know." And we'd get it, you know, and they gradually started to come together in that respect, socially.
Can I ask you something?
What are
real
you
quick?
thinking of, May?
We just had a sisterhood meeting, and we were talking about, Sandra Umstead was there.
Oh.
She said that years ago, there was there was a bathing suit contest. To
Yes.
see who
That
would be
was
the
the one.
best. And I was wondering if you were part of that, because
Oh,
she
yeah.
said that Max Heller was the
He
winner.
wore a bathing suit. They
We
said,
got,
"What
I
a-
got him, May and I got all the,
beautiful legs he had."
all the clothes to wear and everything for them to
Were
wear.
you in it too?
No, I was sitting over there screaming at him and teasing the hell out of him. And Max had a nice pair of legs when he pranced up.
I
the
heard
thing.
he had a one-piece
Yeah,
black bathing suit.
Yeah, and one guy
But we
wore
had fun,
these
but we raised
pants.
a lot of money.
One guy wore these pants with like a leopard bottom. He was skinny
Oh,
as a
yeah.
rail.
Really? Those are in
He
style
was
now.
skinny as a rail,
yeah, he was
and he
like
had a
us.
lot of hair on his chest.
How was it for your girls growing up Jewish here in Greenville?
It
and going to
was
school?
it was not
not
easy.
good.
Really? Why
No.
did they experience any
Why?
anti-Semitism?
Because they were never invited to join a sorority. They were blacklisted, and if you want to know, one was a Jewish girl who helped blacklisted.
Really?
That comes from a lot of snobbiness from parents.
This was,
Because, yeah, it's up to the parents to lead the child to the right way.
And when I still remember, things like that stick out in your mind. When my youngest daughter came home one day, I don't remember the girl's name, but she couldn't, she said I was at her house, and I told her tomorrow she can come to my house. She said, oh, my parents said I can't come to your house, you're Jewish.
Oh, one
So
said
she
she
had that-
can't play, she can't do anything with her because she's Jewish. My younger one, my older one, didn't have as much of a problem, but the Cindy was like ashamed of being Jewish. And then she said, my friend's mother said, you can't play with her, she's Jewish.
None of our faith,
So,
yeah.
and then something came up, and Cindy wasn't invited to join the sorority, and I did the carpool. I picked up all those kids, 4 kids or whatever, and I let them out, and Cindy is still in my car, and she's crying her head off. She said, what's the matter? She says, if only I was asked to join, but I was never asked to join. And it was so hurtful to me. And then she said, how would you like to be the only Jewish girl in the class? I said, I think I would be very proud to be Jewish. Well, the greatest thing that ever happened to my kid was the war. They had the 6-day war, was it the 6-day war
Yeah.
or something?
67.
Like that. And all the Gentile people came here to synagogue, and Cindy's eyes, big black eyes, were going, there's my friend's mother, and there's my friend's mother, and there's my friend. All the Gentile people came.
So then they came to support?
They came to support
Wow.
everything. I said, see, Cindy?
that's
And I used
So-
to get down in the mornings, I'd get down for morning coffee down to Woolworth's, that other store, and
It was
I walked in
Woolworths.
after that 6-day war, and all the guys sat at the pool. I was the only Jewish guy there, but I knew these were all well-educated men that I was sitting with from various, they all got up and applauded me, and I said, what's going on, and not realizing that I didn't think in that term, you guys just won, you just won. My oldest daughter graduated Wade Hampton High School and then went to the University of Tennessee. And when she graduated, she comes back with a boyfriend, and she's gonna get married. And I said, Andrea, you just got a great education. Do what you want to do, Well, I'm going for my master's at Clemson, and I said, so be a stewardess, be something, find out your place. She's gonna get married. And he wasn't Jewish, very nice young man. So the rabbi of the temple I spoke to him, and he and the rabbi for the synagogue at the time, and they interviewed him. And they came to me and they said, the rabbi said, well, we can't marry him in the synagogue, but the temple rabbi said, well, I'll marry him in the temple, if the board agrees, because he's going to raise his children as Jewish. He's convinced me that he's a nice young man, and if you approve him as a husband, etc. And he said, I will be happy to marry him in the temple. And he was right, because he did raise the children, So they got married, but the board of directors at the temple, what's her name?
Oh, it's not important.
Oh, goodness, well, good friends of mine. Yeah, well, anyway, the chairman came to me and said, it just came before the board to see if they allowed the intermarriage in the temple, and it was 100% approval, And so she got married in the temple, not here. I can be proud to say that I stopped a big demonstration downtown. The KKK was having one, and marching down Main Street, and I had to stop myself. I went to the then mayor at the time and the council. And
Do you remember what
and
year
it would have to be in the
Well,
60s. We call
belong
the
to-
police.
So what year was that? Can we go back, talk about what that was like?
Yeah,
I would say the time I stopped that rally, I'm trying to figure out where I was in
but
business.
he belonged to the B'nai B'rith, and he sent the word along to the powers that be.
National?
Yeah.
And Atlanta.
And they called
Which he
in
immediately put me
whoever
on
had
the
to be
board there
called
in
in.
Atlanta. But
Because we had it.
Look,
Were you afraid?
if
Like
you have a
physically
problem
afraid?
today,
Oh,
call me,
yeah,
because
I
I'll
mean,
I
call the
would be.
sheriff today and say, and call him by his first name and say, Steve, this gal's got a problem, what can you do for me, And in those days, we all knew each other, as we said. And in my case, apparently I must have picked up the phone or somehow got in touch with the mayor, whoever was mayor at the time, and the council, who I knew very well, and the police chief.
So they all supported
And they
you?
all
and-
supported, I said, you're gonna cause problems in the street here because, and I embellished it about what, there's gonna be a riot and all that. And next thing I heard that the parade was stopped, They were down with the Klan, they were really gonna come down the street, and that would have been maybe in the 60s. I don't think I was on it was in the 60s.
It wasn't in the 60s. It
I
was
was on the
earlier.
it was pretty
It
early.
was earlier.
50s or 60s somewhere.
What about, was
Late 50s maybe. On a
was it?
social basis, the synagogue and the temple, they were like enemies, if that's a proper word.
Well, I
They
would-
just didn't like each other, they wouldn't help each other, they wouldn't work together. They were adversarial so much, and it was so annoying to a New York City boy like me. I think we
opened their
You
eyes.
probably, you,
I
I'm sure
think
you
May and
helped.
I, and Max Heller, and others, we helped the older generation that was here before, where they were separate, not only with it Judaism and other, Christianity, but it was also the temple and the synagogue. And it was, everybody was in their own niche, and it kind of got pulled together as more people came in from outside. Well, it was outsourcing really, coming in from all over the country and everything, and I assume that's why. When I moved here, I mentioned that it was a dress shop in the upper scale, and that we shared with Mr. Rothschild, who was president of the temple, a very nice man. He said, don't expect the Jewish people to give you any business. They won't give you any business, And he every
was
year,
right.
a couple of years, he was amazed that I started to do business with some of the Jewish women would come in, and once they got to know me. But it was a different breed coming in. With the old timers, they just didn't, they were reform, or they belonged to the synagogue, and that was it. And they had a function, it was separate. They didn't go together or anything.
So there were,
And they once had a shootout, remember that?
Oh, yeah.
There was once a shootout.
For the temple, oh.
Yeah.
When
They were
he
having
came
a
home,
big-
I thought he was gonna kill himself because the other guys were gonna kill themselves.
Yeah, they pulled out guns, they were fighting about something.
They were
Literally?
fighting,
Yeah,
yeah,
it was a
in the
cookout of some
temple.
kind, and they took out, they was shooting dice and
wait,
playing
now
cards.
who's they?
and-
Who are we talking about now? Are we talking about
Said
the
there
Oh,
was
I'm
the
talking about
temple.
1950s.
temple versus the
The
synagogue?
temple.
Synagogue, yeah.
The thing that I feel like we contributed in our small way, I participated in everything. And somehow, as a New Yorker, you don't think you didn't do that, But here, I guess it was Max who told me, you got to join, you got to belong. And I believe, and I joined Kiwanis, and it was good for my business, as it turned out. And I was president of B'nai B'rith twice. I must have done such a good or bad job that they said, hey, come on again, But we were active. B'nai B'rith was active in those days. We went and did things all over, and we made it, people saw, we made sure that we got into the papers and all that. And we traveled around the state, and I became a district there. I didn't even know what I was doing, but I was trying my best.
And I was the head of B'nai B'rith for the kids. I traveled all over. That was the best part of my life. I went to every convention with the
BBYO,
kids.
with the youth
And I
organization.
learned a lot from going with them for ourselves and the places like in Tennessee. There was a wonderful, wonderful man who was very charitable and giving. And you learn a lot when you go. I want to tell you that when I said when I had an interview with the head of the newspaper, because I felt that we were not getting the play with advertising in certain areas, and I wanted them to know that I can't appreciate it. I said, such and such a person gets to be where they want to be on the page
You mean
or
the
whatever.
placement on the
Yeah.
page? So you just said, why don't I get that right-hand page
I
on the
said,
top?
but there's a
Exactly,
lot of
yeah.
things that happen that, and I want to tell you, is because, it's because we're Jewish. And he looks at me with his eyes would open up. I said, you may not realize it, but that's the way it is.
You think that was why?
Yes.
And so did he?
To me, oh yeah. So then all the other things that I pointed out to him, which had to do with the fact that we were Jewish, I said, well, you're right about a lot of these things, and we have to do something about it, except one thing I don't think you're right about. I said, give me 10 more minutes.
Well, what was the one thing?
And I told him the one thing, it had to do with our religion. And
So even while you were in
well,
business and all that?
It changed. He said, but I have to tell you, I agree with you now.
Could you say was a relationship between the Jewish community and the black community when the civil rights movement started? Did
Yeah,
you feel like
yeah.
did you feel comfortable supporting them, or did you try to just
You
stay
didn't
out
show
of it,
any
or-
support, really support, but
I'll
we
show
didn't
you how
do
I
anything.
supported them. The first person that I hired after I started hiring people was a black girl, and I made her my manager. And to me, it didn't mean anything. She was qualified, and she was recommended to me, and she stayed with me for 25 years, and she was there. And it didn't occur to me what I was doing, because if it did, I might not have done it. I might have, for my own protection, not have hired Lula. Lula Jenkins, her name was. And, but she was there, and I knew that, May said she doesn't remember that, but I knew that there's some people that were reticent about when they came in and they saw a black person. And she didn't wait on people. She was my assistant. She helped me with the cleaning and with the storage and generally bookkeeping, whatever. But
I think,
what happened was, one day, Jesse Jackson and the crowd went down on Woolworths, and they're down there, and this whole thing erupted. And the next day, and this is what the thing that always stuck out to me, why I said the editorial page. The next day, the Greenville News said, this is the law, and we've got to uphold the law, and blah, blah, and I was so surprised and pleasantly, frankly, I was really, I said, wow, this is great. And they stood up for it. They kept maintaining, because those are the time when they were burning buses in Massachusetts, or everything was going crazy in those days.
let me say something about the blacks and as far as the Jews goes. They all had help. Anybody that had money had some help. I had somebody that came she didn't come once a week, but 50 cents an hour. But I had a black girl clean my house, and I would give her my whole bank book and trusted her.
She raised my children.
She raised our children, but I invited her to my kids' bat mitzvahs and the naming of the baby here.
She was part of our family.
And she was part of
It
our
wasn't
family.
living, it wasn't living.
They wanted to cut out a day, Saturday. They wanted to cut out Saturday. It was in the newspaper.
The buses,
I-
you mean?
huh?
The buses they wanted to cut
The
out?
buses, yeah, they wanted to cut out the bus the thing on Saturday. And the girl that worked for me, she said, we can't come to work, if they cut out Saturday. And then I met another person who I just met, her, it's a sideline, but I met her during that time. I said, you're in business, you're really afraid to talk. I said, but I'm going to talk. When I see in the newspaper that one of our councilmen that we elected is telling us to cut out the Saturday, I'm going to get down there and voice my opinion. And I got to Charlotte. That's the one that worked for me for so many years. I shut Charlotte. You go to your church, and you get all these people to come down to the bus. We take 40 some odd people on the bus, and we have to get on the bus and go to City Hall and tell them we want a bus on Saturday.
So
Yes,
that's what you
ma'am.
did?
Well, we got a bus full up, and I went with a newspaper wrapped like this, and I got up, and I was afraid to speak then. That's why I went to Furman at night, and I took public speaking. So I got up there, and I still had to be careful of what I said. I said, I live in a very, very nice house, and I have 2 very nice cars.
And a nice mortgage.
And I said, but I also have only 2 people that would be out of a job if you cut out Saturday. I said, and we can't do that. This is what's going to happen. So they said, that changed it. They did not cut out Saturdays.
You know what the biggest surprise to me was? One of the biggest is the newspaper. The newspaper came out when we started to integrate, and the newspaper came out and said, the editorial said, this is the law and this is the way it has to be, and we have to abide by the law. And they were very positive about it, and I was very surprised.
Because we were merchants, we were in the position and belonged to a synagogue that we could do what we did with the blacks.
We mixed. We didn't know from this business being that you're Catholic, he's Jewish, and we knew it, but nobody,
But when we
it
came
wasn't
here, you
offensive.
found out that there was a difference.
Yeah.
It was a lot more
And if
segregated.
you wanted
Yeah.
to sit back and do nothing about it, you did, but we helped do what we did. And I think we had a lot to do with mixing the blacks and the people who were non-Jewish.